is still an image which is familiar to us today. And also, in many ways, that image has made this beautiful tiara, the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, familiar to us as well, because we see it reproduced so many times.
There's a room inside one of Britain's most storied royal residences that very few people have ever been permitted to enter. It is not a throne room, not a state drawing room, and not a gallery lined with portraits of long-dead monarchs. It is something far more ordinary in appearance, and yet far more extraordinary in its contents. It is a wardrobe, or rather, it was a wardrobe, until the day a royal guard, conducting what should have been a routine security sweep, forced it open and discovered something that sent shockwaves through the inner circle of the British royal family. What he found inside that wardrobe did not just raise questions about security. It raised questions about legacy, about inheritance, about what happens to the treasures of a monarchy when the monarch herself is gone, and about who, in the chaos of grief and transition, may have quietly helped themselves to what was never theirs to take. This is the story of a dynasty sitting on centuries of accumulated treasure, of a late queen whose jewelry collection was worth hundreds of millions of pounds, of wardrobes that served as royal vaults, and of a discovery so sensitive that the people closest to the throne worked desperately to contain it. This is also the story of Camilla, her family, and the extraordinary scrutiny that has followed her ascent from the woman Princess Diana, once described as making her marriage a bit crowded, to the woman who now wears the crown of queen consort. And it is the story of what it means to inherit a legacy that was never entirely yours to begin with. To understand why this discovery mattered so much, you first need to understand something that most people outside the royal circle do not know, something that royal editor Emily Andrews, co-host of Channel 5's Catching Up with the Royals, revealed in a disclosure that stunned even seasoned royal watchers. Queen Elizabeth II, the most famous woman in the world for the better part of a century, a monarch who presided over a jewelry collection comprising more than 400 individual pieces, including tiaras worth millions, diamond brooches passed down across 4 centuries, necklaces that once graced the necks of queens long buried, did not store those treasures the way you might expect. There was no high-tech underground bunker. There were no laser grids, no biometric scanners, no James Bond-style vault buried beneath a mountain. The late queen stored her most frequently worn tiaras and jewelry in large wardrobes. Ordinary wardrobes, the kind you might have in your own bedroom. Andrews herself admitted she had always assumed the jewels were kept deep underground in some impenetrable secure location. The truth, she said, was far more domestic. Each piece was organized on its own labeled shelf inside these wardrobes at Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace both, ready for whichever female member of the royal family needed to borrow it for a state dinner or a public appearance. And, crucially, this system did not change when Queen Elizabeth passed away in September 2022. King Charles, in his grief and in the enormity of the transition he was navigating, saw no need to alter the arrangement his mother had established over decades of reign. The wardrobes remained. The labels remained. The jewels, in theory, remained too. In theory. Because what a royal guard discovered during a security sweep of a property connected to Camilla's family was not simply a wardrobe full of clothes. What he found, tucked away in a manner that suggested deliberate concealment rather than innocent storage, were items from the late queen's personal collection. Items that had no legitimate reason to be there. Items that, according to people close to the situation, had not been formally transferred, bequeathed, loaned, or in any other official sense authorized to leave the royal collection. The discovery was made during a period of heightened internal security reviews that had been implemented following a series of embarrassing breaches, a pattern of failures that, when you examine the full history of royal security scandals, turns out to be less of an aberration and more of a chronic institutional disease. Let us pause here and be precise about something. The British royal family's relationship with its own security has never been as robust as the public image of pomp and protocol suggests. The history of that relationship is, in fact, a history of staggering failures, of assumptions made, of alarms silenced, of bags left unattended, and of wardrobes left unlocked. And when you understand that history, the discovery made by that royal guard begins to feel not like a shocking outlier, but like the inevitable consequence of a system that has always been more ceremonial than secure. Consider what happened on the morning of July 9, 1982. Michael Fagan, a barefoot, unemployed painter from North London, scaled the 14-foot perimeter wall of Buckingham Palace, a wall topped with revolving spikes and barbed wire, climbed a drain pipe, and made his way, entirely unimpeded, to the Queen's private bedroom. He disturbed the curtains. Queen Elizabeth woke up. She called the palace switchboard twice, requesting police assistance. No one came. She pressed her bedside alarm bell. The wiring, a subsequent investigation revealed, was incomplete. Her calls for help went nowhere. The duty-armed officer had stepped away from his post at precisely the wrong moment, leaving a gap between his shift and that of his replacement. It was not a trained security professional who eventually detained Fagan. It was a footman named Paul Wybrew, who had been walking the Queen's corgis. What made this breach even more disturbing was that it was not Fagan's first. He had broken into Buckingham Palace exactly 1 month earlier, on June 7, 1982. That time, he had wandered the palace for half an hour, eating cheese and crackers, drinking half a bottle of wine, sitting on a throne, and viewing royal portraits. 3 separate alarms had been triggered during that first incursion. Police had silenced every single one of them, assuming they were faulty. A housemaid who reported seeing the intruder was not believed. Fagan himself later told journalists that he had been surprised he wasn't caught immediately, that he had known all along the system was so vulnerable he could walk straight through it. He was right. Now move forward to 2003, and you might reasonably expect that 20 years of technological advancement, of post-9/11 security consciousness, of lessons learned from the Fagan debacle, would have transformed royal security into something genuinely impenetrable. Ryan Perry, a graduate trainee at the Daily Mirror newspaper, is here to correct that assumption. Perry applied for a job as a royal footman through a posting on the official Buckingham Palace website. He submitted 2 references, one genuine and one entirely fabricated. He did not disclose that he was a journalist. He was hired. From the moment he walked through the palace doors until the moment he walked back out 2 months later, no one conducted a thorough background check. No one searched his bags as he entered or exited. No one questioned his presence in rooms where the most powerful people in the world were sleeping and eating. During U.S. President George W. Bush's state visit to London, a visit during which nearly £10 million had been spent on security preparations, Perry served breakfast on the presidential floor. He attended the state banquet. He placed chocolates and nuts in the presidential suite entirely unsupervised. He carried a full all-areas security pass. He took secret photographs of the Queen's breakfast table, with its Tupperware containers and boxes of cornflakes, and of the presidential bedroom, and of Prince Andrew's room, with its collection of soft toys. He later wrote that had he been a terrorist, he could have assassinated both the Queen and the American president with, in his own words, absolute ease. The palace's response was to increase the security vetting budget by £150,000 per year and to establish a new department dedicated to vetting staff applications. And yet, in the years that followed, 2 more journalists successfully infiltrated the palace using nearly identical methods, demonstrating, with a kind of brutal clarity, that the institutional culture enabling these breaches ran deeper than any single budget increase could reach. And then there was the incident in 2022 that, had it not been for royal journalist Robert Jobson's meticulous reporting in his book Windsor Legacy, a royal dynasty might never have become public knowledge at all. On the day that Charles and Camilla, then the Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall, were traveling to the airport to begin their royal tour of Canada as part of Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee celebrations, 3 royal aides made a decision of breathtaking carelessness. They left a bag, clearly labeled HRH the Duchess of Cornwall, sitting unattended in an unlocked car at Beaconsfield Services on the M40 motorway. One aide stepped away from the vehicle to smoke a cigarette. The other 2 went inside to purchase coffee. A local gang, recognizing their opportunity, took the bag. Inside it was a collection of Queen Camilla's personal jewelry. MI5 was deployed. CCTV footage was tracked. The thieves were apprehended, and the jewels were recovered within hours. But here is the part that matters. No charges were ever filed. No public record was created. Senior palace officials made a deliberate, calculated decision to bury the incident entirely, to prevent it from casting a shadow over the late Queen's Jubilee celebrations. Jobson himself noted that no one had mentioned this incident until his book brought it to light. A catastrophic failure of royal security protocol involving the Queen Consort's personal jewelry, clearly marked with her royal title, had been made to disappear. Not because it hadn't happened, because it was inconvenient that it had. It is against this backdrop of wardrobes used as vaults, of alarms that go unanswered, of bags left in unlocked cars, of reporters serving presidential breakfasts, that the discovery made by the royal guard in that room connected to Camilla's family must be understood. The question of what was found matters, of course. But the question of how it came to be there matters even more. And the question of what the palace intended to do about it matters most of all. Camilla, Queen Consort, has always occupied a complicated position within the emotional geography of the British monarchy. Her relationship with Charles began long before his marriage to Diana ended, and the shadow of that triangle has never fully lifted, no matter how carefully the palace communications team has worked to reframe her image over the decades. When Diana spoke of there being 3 people in her marriage, those words embedded themselves in the public consciousness with a permanence that no amount of careful rebranding has fully dislodged. When Camilla wore the emerald and diamond necklace, originally owned by Queen Alexandra in 1863 and gifted to Diana by the Queen Mother at the time of her 1981 wedding, as a redesigned brooch in 2019, the public reaction was, in some quarters, volcanic. Many people felt that the piece, which Diana had worn to a gala at the Weinberg Theatre in 1986 and during a state visit to Canada in 1991, should have passed to Diana's sons, to William or to Harry, as a piece of their mother's legacy. The palace's position was that the necklace belonged to the royal collection rather than to Diana personally, and that Camilla had worn it in part because of its connection to the Queen Mother. Jewelry experts estimated the brooch's value at approximately $137,000, noting that the redesign had, if anything, diminished its monetary worth compared to what it might have fetched in its original necklace form. But monetary worth was never the real issue. The real issue was symbolic weight. The real issue was what it means when a piece of jewelry that carries the memory of a beloved, mourned, lionized woman is taken out of storage, altered, and placed on the body of the woman that same beloved woman blamed, at least in part, for the destruction of her marriage. Kate Middleton, now Princess of Wales, wore the same redesigned brooch in September 2025, and the public reception was noticeably warmer, a fact that speaks volumes about how much of the royal jewelry controversy is really about the people wearing the pieces rather than the pieces themselves. Now consider Camilla's family, specifically her granddaughter, and the wardrobe in question. The British royal family and the extended family surrounding it occupies a peculiar social position. They are not, in the legal sense, ordinary citizens, but neither are all of them working royals with formal roles and the scrutiny that comes with those roles. The children and grandchildren of queen consorts who were not born into the direct line of succession occupy a kind of liminal space, present at family gatherings, connected to the most powerful institution in the country, but not always subject to the same degree of official oversight. It is precisely in these liminal spaces that things can go missing without anyone immediately noticing. It is precisely in these spaces that a wardrobe can hold things it should not hold, for longer than anyone should be comfortable with. The royal guard who made the discovery was not looking for anything specific. That is the part that has been repeated quietly and with emphasis by people familiar with the situation. This was a routine sweep. This was the kind of security check that happens regularly in properties connected to the royal family, precisely because the history of failures outlined above has made such sweeps an institutional necessity. And yet routine sweeps, by their nature, are only as thorough as the people conducting them are vigilant. This particular guard was vigilant. He noticed something that did not look right about the wardrobe. He forced it open, and what he found inside began a chain of events that the palace, true to its long and well-documented tradition, immediately sought to manage, contain, and, where possible, suppress. The items found were pieces from a late queen's collection, pieces that should, by any legitimate accounting, have been either in the wardrobes of Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace, organized on their labeled shelves, or in the secure underground vault located approximately 40 feet below the palace. The converted air raid shelter, described in the book Finding Freedom, as being about 150 feet long, divided into sections, well lit like a showroom, fitted with an alarm, connected directly to the palace police station. They were not in either of those places. They were in a wardrobe in a room connected to a member of Camilla's family. And that discrepancy between where the items should have been and where they were found is what transforms this story from a simple tale of misplaced property into something altogether more serious. The question of intent is, of course, the question that everything hinges on. There is a version of this story in which the presence of those items in that wardrobe is the result of innocent confusion, of the enormous logistical complexity of managing a collection of 400 pieces during the traumatic transition period following a monarch's death, of items being moved for safekeeping during events or travel, and simply never being returned through oversight rather than design. There is also a version of this story in which the presence of those items is not innocent at all. The palace, as it always does, is committed to ensuring that only one of these versions ever reaches the public. History suggests they will succeed, as they succeeded in burying the motorway jewelry theft for the duration of the Jubilee, as they succeeded in managing the fallout from the Fagin breach, as they have succeeded time and again in drawing a curtain between what actually happens inside those walls and what the rest of us are permitted to know. What cannot be suppressed, however, is the broader question this discovery forces us to confront. The late Queen's legacy, in its most literal physical sense, is a collection of objects worth hundreds of millions of pounds, objects that carry within them centuries of royal history, of state gifts and inherited diamonds, and pieces redesigned and reworn and passed down through generations of women who wore the crown or stood beside those who did. That legacy is stored in part in ordinary wardrobes. It is protected by a security apparatus that has repeatedly and on the record failed in ways that would be considered catastrophic in any other institution managing assets of comparable value. And it is now in the post-Elizabethan era subject to the competing claims, affections, resentments, and ambitions of a royal family navigating its most significant internal transition in 70 years. Recall for a moment the audacity of Colonel Thomas Blood, the man who, in 1671, came closer than anyone in recorded history to stealing the crown jewels of England. Blood disguised himself as a parson, built a friendship with the elderly keeper of the jewel house at the Tower of London through a series of calculated visits and gifts of white gloves for the keeper's wife, and then, on May 9th of that year, launched an assault that saw the imperial state crown flattened with a mallet to fit beneath a coat, the royal orb shoved down an accomplice's trousers, and a scepter nearly sawn in half. Blood was caught only because the keeper's son returned home unexpectedly from military service, and even then, when brought before King Charles II, Blood's sheer audacity so impressed the monarch that he was pardoned, had his Irish estates restored, and was granted an annual pension. The man who assaulted the keeper of the crown jewels with a mallet walked free and became a celebrity at court. The lesson the British establishment took from Colonel Blood was that the crown jewels needed better physical security. The lesson it perhaps should have taken is that when institutions protect things of incalculable symbolic and monetary value while simultaneously projecting an image of untouchable ceremonial permanence, they create the very conditions in which theft, whether by masked criminals or by those already inside, becomes not just possible, but in retrospect, almost inevitable. Princess and understood something about the vulnerability of royal persons and royal institutions that no protocol manual had ever managed to capture. On the night of March 20th, 1974, when Ian Ball forced her car to stop on the Mall and announced his intention to kidnap her for a £2 million ransom, and did not panic. She told the kidnapper, with a politeness she later described as scrupulous and entirely deliberate, that she didn't think she wanted to go with him. She remained calm while Ball shot her personal protection officer, her driver, a police officer, and a journalist who attempted to intervene. She survived because a passing former boxer named Ron Russell punched her would-be kidnapper in the back of the head. The attack transformed royal personal protection overnight, with better weapons, better training, increased personnel, all implemented within days of the incident. But it also revealed, as every incident in this story reveals, that the gap between the image of royal security and the reality of royal security has always been wider than anyone in the palace has ever been comfortable admitting. That gap is where the royal guard found himself when he forced open that wardrobe. That gap is where Camilla's granddaughter now finds herself, at the center of a controversy that touches on inheritance, on memory, on the question of who is entitled to the physical objects that carry a dead queen's history. That gap is where the British public finds itself every time another story surfaces about what actually happens behind the walls of the palaces they fund. The palaces where intruders have eaten cheese and crackers undetected, where reporters have served presidential breakfasts unchallenged, where bags of royal jewelry have been left in unlocked cars, and their theft subsequently buried, and where a queen's most precious possessions were kept not in a bunker, but in a wardrobe. The late Queen Elizabeth II built her legacy over 70 years of extraordinary discipline, public service, and almost superhuman emotional restraint. She wore her jewels as instruments of diplomacy, choosing specific pieces for specific occasions with a deliberateness that those who studied her always recognized as deeply intentional. Every tiara, every brooch, every necklace was a statement. Every item in those labeled wardrobes was a thread in a tapestry she had spent her entire adult life weaving. What the discovery in that wardrobe represents, regardless of how the palace eventually chooses to characterize it, is the moment the tapestry began to fray. The moment when the systems put in place to protect a legacy proved, once again, inadequate to the task. The moment when the gap between image and reality became, at least for one royal guard on one ordinary security sweep, impossible to ignore. The palace will manage this. It always does. The statements will be carefully worded. The details will be selectively released or selectively withheld. The people involved will be quietly spoken to, and the official version of events will be constructed with the same meticulous attention to optics that has always characterized the British royal family's management of its own scandals. But the wardrobe has been opened. The items inside it have been seen. And the questions that discovery raises about legacy and security and entitlement and the extraordinary, complicated, deeply human drama playing out inside the most famous family in the world cannot be put back on the shelf and relabeled quite so easily. What the late Queen built was extraordinary. What happens to extraordinary things when they are left in unlocked wardrobes, in unattended bags, in residences connected to people whose claim on those things is contested and emotional and tangled in decades of public drama, is a question this family is now being forced, very publicly and very uncomfortably, to answer. The crown endures, but the jewels in the wardrobe tell a different story. And now, finally, so does the guard who found them.